The moment that still haunts me came when Eliza excused herself to the restroom, leaving her phone beside a half-empty glass of wine. My gut had been churning for hours, my instincts warning me that something was wrong. I had been watching them all evening, the way Clark would lean in when she spoke, his hand lingering on her back, just a fraction too long. I sat there tense, gripping my glass of scotch so tightly I feared it might shatter, thinking they were discreet, but I noticed it all. I saw everything. And when she stepped away, I did something I never thought I would. I reached for her phone, my hands shaking, me the guy who dissects legal arguments for a living trembling like a nervous teenager. I didn't even know what I was searching for. A part of me hoped I'd find nothing and could later dismiss my paranoia. But deep down, I already sensed the truth. I unlocked her phone. I knew the passcode. We were married. After all, my heart pounded as I scrolled through her recent messages. Nothing stood out, just the usual chatter with co-workers and friends. My breathing was shallow, my eyes darting over every word, praying to find nothing. And then there it was, a message from Clark. It seemed harmless at first. Can't wait to see you tonight. 7 words. 7 words that changed everything. It looked innocent enough, like something you'd send a friend before a party, but that winking emoji, it felt like a knife twisting in my gut. This wasn't just friendly, there was something hidden beneath the surface. My blood ran cold and the words blurred on the screen. I scrolled up, desperate for an explanation, something to convince me I was overreacting. But the more I read, the worse it got. It wasn't explicit, they weren't stupid enough for that. But there was a subtext and intimacy that went far beyond friendship, filled with inside jokes and flirty comments like, remember last time and hope we find a better spot tonight. I didn't need to be a genius to figure out what was happening. I stared at the screen, feeling everything I knew about my life, my marriage, and my best friend collapse like a house of cards. It was like one of those movie moments where time slows down and the main character watches their world unravel in slow motion, powerless to stop it. I must have read that text a dozen times, trying to make sense of it, my pulse racing and my palms sweaty. The noise of the party faded into the background. For a moment, I considered putting the phone back and pretending I hadn't seen anything. Maybe it was all just a misunderstanding, right? But the pit in my stomach told me otherwise. This wasn't innocent. This was betrayal in its rawest form, and I was on the edge of a cliff, about to fall. Eliza returned from the restroom, completely oblivious to the storm raging inside me. She smiled and asked if I wanted another drink, unaware that her world was about to shatter. I slipped her phone back on the table before she could notice, trying to act normal, even though I felt like I was seconds away from breaking apart. I forced a smile and nodded, my throat tight, my mind screaming at me to act, to speak, but I couldn't, not yet. That was when I realized our marriage was barely holding together, and I had no clue how to fix it or if I even wanted to try anymore. I watched her, my heart thumping in my chest, knowing that from this point on, everything was changed forever. I needed more evidence as much as that text gnawed at me. Part of me still clung to the hope that I was mistaken. Maybe it was just my imagination driven by paranoia and jealousy. Maybe that message didn't mean what I thought it did. I tried to convince myself it could be innocent, that I was just overthinking it all, but deep down I knew I just wasn't ready to accept it yet. I needed to see it with my own eyes to be sure. If I was going to confront Eliza and blow up our lives, I couldn't afford to be wrong. So one evening when Eliza mentioned she'd be working late, I decided to follow her. Yeah, it sounds like something out of a cheesy detective movie, but I was desperate. She had been working late a lot recently, always talking about big projects, client meetings, and tight deadlines. I'd swallowed her excuses for weeks, trying to be the understanding husband. But that night I wasn't going to be fooled anymore. I waited until she left the house, her heels clicking confidently on the driveway, her perfume hanging in the air like poison. I gave her a few minutes head start before grabbing my keys and heading out. My heart pounded as I tailed her, keeping a safe distance so she wouldn't spot me. She wasn't heading toward the office, that much was obvious. Instead, she drove toward the city center, immediately setting off alarms in my mind. Why would she need to go downtown for work? After about 20 minutes, she pulled into a parking lot of a small hotel. You know, the type, cheap, quiet, tucked away. The kind of place people go when they want to disappear for a while. My stomach turned as I parked down the street, far enough that she wouldn't notice me, but close enough to keep watch. I observed as she stepped out of the car, glancing around cautiously, making sure she wasn't being watched. And then, right on cue, Clark appeared. There he was, my best friend, walking toward her without a care in the world, like he wasn't about to meet my wife at a shady hotel. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly I thought it might snap, my chest tight, my pulse thundering in my ears, as the scene unfolded before me, a nightmare I couldn't wake from. They didn't waste a second. As soon as Clark reached her, he wrapped his arm around her waist like it was the most natural thing, pulling her close. I caught my breath as I watched him lean in, pressing his lips to hers in a slow, deliberate kiss. It wasn't rushed or guilty, it was something deeper, something that reeked of familiarity. The way they moved together, their bodies fitting perfectly, made it clear this wasn't the first time, not by a long shot. I sat there, witnessing my wife's betrayal, watching the woman I had loved for over a decade fall into the arms of another man, my best friend, my brother. They stood there, lost in each other for what felt like an eternity, completely unaware that I was just yards away, watching every single move they made. It was humiliating. I felt like a fool, like every joyful memory, every tender moment we had shared was suddenly a lie, and I was the idiot who never saw it coming. The pain was sharp, stabbing at me with every passing second, but mixed with that agony was something else, something darker. I wasn't just hurt, I was angry. No, I was beyond angry. I was furious. But even as I watched them laugh quietly and head toward the hotel entrance, I kept my cool. I couldn't afford to lose control, not yet. I wanted to storm out of the car, confront them on the spot, scream, punch Clark in his smug face, and drag Eliza out by her hair. But that wouldn't have helped. It would have been too easy for them. I wasn't going to let them see me fall apart. Instead, I stayed put, silently fuming, every part of me focused on keeping it together because I had a plan. I wasn't going to let this end on their terms. This wasn't going to be another pathetic story where the guy gets cheated on and just takes it. No, I was going to make sure they paid for what they did. But I needed time. I needed to think and prepare. So I sat in the shadows, watching them disappear into the hotel, fully aware of what was about to happen behind those walls. Instead of confronting them, I turned the engine on and drove away. My revenge was beginning to take shape in my mind, and when it was all over, it wouldn't be pretty. Revenge wasn't something I could rush. I had to be smart and gather as much information as I could before making my move. So I became a shadow, always a step behind them, but never revealing my presence. I started recording their phone calls. Eliza had become predictable, always stepping outside to take her work calls when she thought I wasn't paying attention. I installed a program on her phone, something I'd learned about from a tech-savvy client, so I could hear everything. I followed her on nights she claimed to be working late, watching her meet Clark at their usual spots. My anger grew with every new piece of evidence I collected, but I didn't let it consume me, not yet. Simply exposing them would have been too easy. Sure, it would have caused a scandal, but they'd move on eventually. I wanted them to feel the same shame and hurt that had been eaten away at me since I read that text. They had to suffer, and I was determined to make that happen. Then, out of nowhere, Haley called Clark's wife. It was unexpected, to say the least. I hadn't spoken to her in weeks. She and Clark always seemed like the perfect couple, at least on the surface. If I felt blindsided by Eliza's betrayal, I couldn't imagine what Haley was dealing with. Yet, when she called, she was surprisingly composed. At first, I didn't think much of it. She just asked how I was, made small talk, the usual pleasantries. But there was something in her voice that caught my attention and unease, like she was trying to figure something out without directly asking. Then, after a long pause, she finally got to the point. "Troy, I need to ask you something," she said, her voice cracking just enough for me to sense the pain she was holding back. Do you think Clark might be seeing someone?" My throat tightened and my stomach churned. How was I supposed to respond? Here she was, probably just beginning to suspect something was wrong, while I already knew the whole sordid truth. I couldn't just unload everything on her over the phone, so I hesitated, trying to find the right words. She kept talking, her words filling the silence as though it gave her the freedom to voice her doubts. She told me how Clark had been staying late at work more often, how he'd grown distant and distracted. She admitted that she'd started to wonder if there was someone else but hadn't wanted to believe it. She didn't want to be that wife, the one who jumps to conclusions without evidence. But now everything was beginning to make sense, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I wanted to tell her the truth right there, to let it all out and reveal that not only was her husband cheating, but he was doing it with my wife. But something held me back, maybe guilt, maybe not wanting to see her heart shatter like mine had when I first found out. So I just listened, letting her spill her suspicions and fears, everything she had kept bottled up. Then she asked the question that made my heart stop. "Troy," she said, her voice softer now, almost a whisper, "Do you suspect something?" Her words hung in the air like a heavy burden, and I knew I couldn't lie anymore. I had been carrying this secret for too long, and it was tearing me apart. I nodded, though she couldn't see me over the phone, and when I finally spoke, my voice was strained. "Yeah, Haley, I do." There was a pause, and I could almost hear her piecing it all together. But instead of breaking down as I expected, she remained silent, and then she said something I hadn't anticipated. "Let's meet." We met the next day at a small cafe, one of those quiet places nobody really notices. I arrived first, and when she walked in, I hardly recognized her. Haley, who was always so composed, now looked worn out and almost hollow. She sat across from me, avoiding eye contact at first, nervously stirring her coffee, as if the answers to her problems might be at the bottom of the cup. Neither of us knew how to start, so we sat in uncomfortable silence that felt like it stretched on forever. Finally, she spoke, her voice just above a whisper. "He's been distant, Troy. Coming home late, making excuses. It's like he's not even here anymore. I don't know what to do." I gripped the edge of the table, struggling to find the words. How do you tell someone their entire world is about to collapse? I wanted to shield her from the truth, but I knew I couldn't keep it hidden forever. When she looked me in the eye and asked, "Do you think he's cheating on me?" I couldn't hold back any longer. "I think he is," I said, my voice barely steady, and I think it's with Eliza. Her expression shifted instantly, the sadness replaced by something colder and more determined. But she didn't cry or fall apart. Instead, she leaned in closer, her eyes sharp with a resolve I hadn't expected. Then let's make them pay, her words hit me like a punch. She wasn't looking for pity or comfort, she wanted revenge. And suddenly I realized we were on the same page. She wasn't going to be a victim, and neither was I. We were going to take control together. I nodded, my mind already working out the details. We were going to do this right, and when we were done, Clark and Eliza wouldn't know what hit them. From that moment, Haley and I started meeting more frequently. It was supposed to be all business, strategizing how to catch our spouses in the act, but something else was growing between us. We were both broken, shattered by the betrayal of those we trusted most. And in our shared pain, we found a connection that didn't need words. She understood what I was going through in a way no one else could. The more we talked, the closer we got. She'd vent about Clark, and I'd unleash my anger about Eliza, but there was always this underlying tension, something simmering just beneath the surface, waiting to break free. One evening, Haley came over to my place. It had become a routine: dinners, late-night talks, and plotting our next moves. But that night felt different. I cooked dinner, something simple, but I could barely concentrate on the food. Our conversation was strained. We talked about Clark and Eliza, about our plans for revenge and how we'd expose them for the lies they were. But underneath it all, there was something heavier in the air. I felt it. And I knew she did too. She looked stunning that night, her long dark hair cascading over her shoulders, and her eyes, usually filled with sadness and hurt, now sparkled with something else, something raw and untamed. She wore a simple black dress, nothing extravagant, but it clung to her curves in a way that made it impossible not to notice. I tried to concentrate on what we were talking about, to keep my focus on our plan, but my eyes kept wandering to her lips, her neck, the way she moved. After dinner, we didn't get up right away. We just sat there, the silence between us thick and charged. I could feel her gaze on me, and when I finally met her eyes, she didn't look away. She was staring right at me, and in that moment, everything else disappeared. At Troy, she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper, "We're just as much cheaters as they are." Her words hit me like a punch, but she wasn't finished. "But I can't keep this inside any longer." Her hand moved to my shoulder, warm and electric, and my breath caught. We both knew what was happening, knew where this was going. A part of me wanted to stop, to pull back before it went too far. But another part, one that hadn't felt alive in a long time, was pulling me toward her. It was as if all the anger, betrayal, and hurt were overflowing, and she was the only person who could understand. I leaned in, our faces just inches apart, and before I could think twice, our lips crashed together in a kiss that was all-consuming. It wasn't gentle, it was urgent, hungry, like we were pouring all our pain into each other. Her lips were soft, her breath shaky, and as I pulled her closer, I felt her body melt into mine. There was no turning back now. We didn't stop. I grabbed her waist, lifting her onto my lap, and she responded with equal intensity, her fingers tangling in my hair, pulling me closer, wanting more. We stumbled to the couch, our bodies entangled in a mess of raw emotion and desire. I hadn't felt this kind of passion in years, not with Eliza, not with anyone. Haley's touch, the feel of her skin against mine, was everything I'd been missing. The anger, the betrayal, they all faded into the background as we lost ourselves in each other. Her dress slipped off easily, and soon we were tangled together, moving with a surprising urgency. It wasn't just about the sex, it was about reclaiming something we'd both lost, something our spouses had stolen from us. Her moans filled the room as we moved from the couch to the floor, then to the bedroom, and even into the bathroom, neither of us willing to stop, neither of us ready to come down from the high of forgetting who we were, even if just for a few hours. The sex was wild, passionate, chaotic, a storm of emotions wrapped in flesh and heat. We were two broken people trying to outrun our pain, using each other as an escape from the chaos our lives had become. And for those few hours, it worked. I wasn't thinking about Eliza or Clark, revenge or betrayal. I was thinking about Haley, her body, her warmth, the breathless moans in my ear. But when the heat of the moment faded and reality set in, I lay there staring at the ceiling, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on me like a boulder. Haley was asleep next to me, curled up against my side, but I couldn't close my eyes. The truth gnawed at me, twisting in my gut. I had betrayed Eliza, yes, but more than that, I had betrayed myself. By crossing that line, I had become part of the very thing I despised. I had sunk to their level, and no amount of revenge could ever change that. After that night with Haley, everything shifted. It wasn't just the physical act that altered things, it was the realization that I had crossed a line, both morally and personally. The floodgates had opened, releasing all the anger, betrayal, and despair I had kept buried for so long. Haley and I continued seeing each other, but now every meeting carried an undercurrent of tension, a constant fear of being discovered. The passion between us was undeniable, but so was the growing anxiety that came with it. We were both playing with fire, and we were well aware of it. Still, Haley was the only one who truly understood me during this time. With her, I didn't have to put on an act or wear the facade of the composed, successful lawyer who had everything figured out. She saw through all of that. And although we tried to stick to our original plan of getting back at Eliza and Clark, the lines kept getting blurred. Our conversations grew more tense, and every meeting was charged with a mix of passion and guilt. But no matter how complicated things got, we couldn't stay away from each other. We were in too deep. Meanwhile, things with Eliza continued to unravel. We barely spoke, and when we did, it felt like talking to a stranger. The warmth, the love, everything that had once made our relationship work had vanished. Our conversations were cold and distant, like two people stuck in the same space with nothing left to say. I couldn't stand it anymore. I was done pretending to be the clueless husband. I had seen, heard, and felt enough. But I wasn't going to be the one who walked away looking defeated. No, after uncovering everything about her affair with Clark, I was determined to take control. If anyone was going to leave with their dignity intact, it would be me. I needed to act quickly, and I needed to be ruthless. Then came the call that changed everything. It was from my private investigator. After weeks of tailing them and digging into their every move, he finally delivered the one thing that would seal the deal: evidence. Solid, undeniable proof. He handed me a folder packed with photos, videos, and screenshots of their conversations. There it was, plain as day, Eliza and Clark, caught in the act at that hotel. I had everything I needed, not just to confront Eliza, but to destroy her in court. With cheaters, you don't play fair, and I wasn't about to start now. The moment I had that folder in my hands, everything shifted in my mind. I had been waiting for this, for the moment when I could take control and change the narrative. I wasn't going to let Eliza play the victim or twist the situation any longer. This was my move. That evening, I set the stage. I cooked dinner, nothing fancy, just enough to make it seem like any other night. I poured some wine, lit a few candles, and waited. I had to stay calm, make everything appear normal. When Eliza came home, she was already suspicious. I could see it in the way she paused at the door, her eyes scanning the room as if she was trying to figure out what was happening. But she sat down anyway, took a sip of wine, and forced a smile. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was pounding. I watched her grip her wine glass a little tighter. I started slow, gentle, as if nothing was amiss. I didn't want her to see what was coming. But as soon as she began making excuses, trying to justify her late nights, pretending like everything was still fine, that's when I pulled out the photos. I laid them on the table one by one, images of her and Clark standing too close in that hotel parking lot, holding hands, laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. And the final blow, a picture of them kissing outside the hotel. Her face turned ghostly pale, the color draining from her cheeks as she stared at the photos, her hands trembling. "How could you do this?" she finally shouted, her voice breaking with a mix of fear and anger. But there was no remorse in her eyes, only the shock of being caught. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I just looked at her, my words sharp and cold. "You're the one who betrayed us, Eliza, not me." I paused, letting my words sink in. "I'm filing for divorce. And by the way, I've already spoken to my lawyer." That last line hit her hard. She hadn't expected me to be the one in control. She had thought she could manipulate her way through this, maybe even turn the tables on me somehow. But now she was starting to realize just how wrong she had been. I wasn't the clueless husband she thought she could manipulate. I had the proof, the leverage, and the upper hand. Eliza sat there, stunned, her eyes darting between the photos and me, trying to figure out her next move. But it was too late. I had already made mine, and there was no turning back. The next day, I filed for divorce, armed with all the evidence I had collected. I hired one of the best divorce attorneys in the city, someone as ruthless as I needed. Our objective was clear: make sure Eliza walked away with nothing. I demanded half of everything, our shared assets, the house, the cars, everything we had built together. But more than that, I positioned myself to seize financial control. I wasn't just walking away, I was going to win. After filing, things moved faster than I had anticipated. Eliza, who thought she could somehow salvage her reputation, was left scrambling, but it was too late for damage control. Word of her affair with Clark spread through our social circles like wildfire. She quickly lost several key work contracts. No one wanted to be associated with the scandal, and even clients who had once praised her cut ties. She was drowning in the chaos she had created, and the more she struggled, the deeper she sank. As for Clark, that arrogant fool thought he could slip away unscathed, but he was wrong. Haley made sure of that. She had stayed quiet initially, letting me take charge with Eliza, but then she went in for the kill. Right after I filed for divorce, Haley filed hers too, and she didn't hold back. Her testimony was brutal, exposing Clark's infidelity, his neglect, and his shady business practices. Her accusations tore him apart, not just on a personal level, but professionally as well. The plot twist came when Haley and I decided to join forces in more ways than one. While Clark was distracted dealing with the fallout of his personal life, I targeted his business. I struck deals with some of his key clients, those who saw the writing on the wall and knew Clark was finished. They switched to me without a second thought. I made sure they understood I had the advantage, and before long, Clark's entire business empire was falling apart. He was hemorrhaging money, losing contracts, and facing lawsuits. There was no escape for him. Clark had thought he could walk away untouched, but Haley and I made sure he didn't. Watching him collapse gave me a strange sense of satisfaction, not because I wanted him to suffer, but because it proved that I had come out on top. I hadn't let him or Eliza break me. I had taken back control of my life and ensured they paid the price for their actions. A few weeks after the dust settled, Haley and I met again, but this time it wasn't just about plotting revenge or celebrating our wins. It was different. We had grown into more than just partners in this twisted game. We had become close, really close. Our meetings were no longer filled with the raw, angry passion of before. Now there was something deeper between us. The intimacy between us shifted too. It wasn't just wild and reckless anymore. It became emotional, something that felt like the beginning of something real. Haley understood me in a way no one else ever had, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had someone by my side who truly got me. Months passed, and the divorce was finalized. I walked away with the house, a significant portion of our assets, and full control of the business I had once shared with Clark. Eliza was left with nothing. She tried to rebuild her life, but without me as her safety net, she struggled. Her betrayal had cost her more than just our marriage. It had cost her everything. As for Clark, he wasn't any better off. Haley left him, and with debts piling up and his reputation in ruins, he was swallowed by the gossip surrounding him. His life had fallen apart, and there was no one left to help him pick up the pieces. Haley and I, on the other hand, no longer had to hide. Our relationship became public, and neither of us cared about what people thought. We had weathered the storm, and now we were building something real together. We weren't just two broken people seeking revenge anymore. We had won, both of us, and were ready to move forward, leaving Eliza and Clark behind. I stood there, taking in everything I had gained: my freedom, my business, my future with Haley, and felt nothing but triumph. I had played the game coldly, calculated every move, and the best part, I didn't regret a single one.